What's up, A-Pushers? Welcome back. Today we're going to do a very informative video, hopefully, that'll help you craft your body paragraphs of your DBQs. So today I'm going to take you through the step-by-step, just like we did last week with the introductory paragraph, about how to write your DBQ for this 2020 Apush DBQ. So there are a number of steps, which I'll talk about first, and then I'll get into our sample based on that DBQ from period 3. So this should also help you in your review for the exam as we're looking at starting looking at periods 3 and 4 in your studying. So without further ado, here we go. So here it is. Here is our DBQ prompt that we were looking at last week, as well as the intro paragraph. So the question asks to evaluate the extent of change in ideas about American independence from 1763 to 1783. So that's what we're going to do today. We set up our thesis, we established our 3 lines of reasoning, and now we need to give it to the evidence that supports that reasoning. Why is this reasoning true, and why does this prove that our thesis is correct? So to do that, we're going to jump into the 5 steps to writing the body paragraph that will support each one of our reasons. So here are our 5 steps to writing the body paragraphs of your DBQ. And they have 5 processes, one of which is pretty easy, and that's the first one, which basically says we're going to restate our reasoning. So you're going to choose, in this case, the first reasoning statement that we made from our thesis, and we're going to start supporting it. So you're going to restate it here, maybe with a little more detail, maybe a little more time spent to clearly communicate it. Then we have to contextualize the reasoning. We have to explain why the reasoning fits within our argument and how it fits within the history and the period that we're discussing. Then we finally move on to the proof, and that is evidence for the argument itself. This is outside evidence. And you probably need 2 of these. So this is where you're going to pull from deep within you those names and the ideas and the official names of laws and the places and the philosophies and things like that to prove that you really understand history and that you remember and can relate these big ideas to very specific pieces of historical evidence. Next, you're going to move on to supporting the reasoning through evidence from the documents themselves. And this is going to be different for every DBQ and for every document. And you're going to have to find a way to connect these documents to your reasoning and then connect that to your argument. Lastly, you need to either to refute or modify the argument, or you have to connect the argument to another historical concept. This should be probably the last sentence or 2 in your body paragraphs, and this is where you really have to stretch that analytical mind. You really have to use your knowledge of history to see how the patterns exist, to see how changes occur, and to connect all these things. In many instances, you're going to choose probably the refute or modify the argument, because sometimes the College Board loves to throw in documents that seem at odds with the argument that you are going to most likely make. So this is an opportunity to refute that or modify it here in the body paragraphs. So these are the 5 processes. Now let's look at what it might look like in an actual DBQ. And you'll notice I've color-coded each one of these steps, and I will color-code the sample response as well. So you'll see how they correspond. Let's get on to that. So here is the sample DBQ response that I wrote based on this prompt. And you'll see again the color coordination based upon those steps that we talked about a second ago. And so let's begin with our first step, which is restating the reasoning. So the first reasoning I gave as to why there was a dramatic and drastic change in the feeling of independence within the colonies during this period goes a little like this. The British abandonment of their unofficial colonial governing policy of salutary neglect following the French Indian War was replaced by one seeking dramatically increased tax revenue and more governmental control of the colonies. Now you'll notice that this is basically what I said in the thesis, except Now I'm adding a couple other things. I'm adding the increased tax revenue and more governmental control. I'm adding a little detail. I'm demonstrating that I know more than just this term that I memorized from a Quizlet. It's demonstrating that I have a greater understanding of the history. But it's also just a simple, just one sentence. So that starts me out, and that's going to be what I come back to. Each one of these points is going to support that idea as we continue on in the body paragraph. In orange, you'll notice that this is where I contextualize that statement. I explain it a little bit, and this is also where I'm contextualizing the documents themselves and my own evidence. So I say, since the earliest days of British colonial America, parliamentary control of the colonies had decreased as the colonists formed local governments loyal to the crown and economically beneficial to Britain and its interests. By the 1750s, the colonies were largely left to their own to levy taxes, to fund local government, to legislate with their own locally elected officials, and to manage their own economy. This pattern of neglect created a legitimate independence in the colonies that, when challenged by Britain in its effort to defend them during the French and Indian War, then pay for it, pushed many colonists towards American independence. So here I give, again, context to my earlier statement about what salutary neglect is, why it changed, what it changed into, and how this changed sort of the American ideas about independence. That's all within that contextualization statement. All this does, though, is set up my actual evidence that I'm going to use to support this claim that that salutary neglect and the end of it pushed Americans to want to be more independent. And that's in green, my first pieces of outside evidence. So here it is. Many colonists joined institutions like the Committee of Correspondence in Boston to discuss ideas of American independence. These organizations were like-minded individuals collected news, ideas, and comrades, communicated to each other through letters all throughout the colonies. These committees helped to spread the ideas of independence and to give them shape through philosophies of leaders like Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Paine. So that's my outside information. It doesn't necessarily directly talk about salutary neglect, but it talks about the fact that salutary neglect ended and people started to take notice. And some of these people formed these organizations like the Committee of Correspondence who start arguing against what the British are doing, as I established in my contextualization sentences. I want to bring your attention to three important things. First of all is the fact that there are three kind of terms, vocab terms, I guess you would say. Committee of Correspondence, Benjamin Franklin, and Thomas Paine. These are those ideas that are those proof that I understand the history and that I know more than just sort of the cursory broad strokes. I also want to bring your attention to the fact that I talk about the Committee of Correspondence and then I explain what it does and what it is. That's so important to get in the points for your outside evidence. And lastly is that last sentence where I say these committees help to spread the ideas of independence and to give them shape. That's really important to demonstrate the fact that that sentence alone ties it back to why salutary neglect ended. Well, not why it ended, but how its ending impacted many Americans and their beliefs in independence, but also to our thesis that this idea of independence changed and drastically changed. So it's so important that I have that last statement there. Moving on to the red section, which is our evidence from the document section, you'll notice that I have used two documents here, and most likely you will need your body paragraphs. Again, there's 5 documents in your DBQ. You should probably use all of them. 3 body paragraphs. You'll have one document just hanging out there by itself, but you should at least try to use 2. So let's see what I got into. One member, Samuel Adams, was a crucial figure in the independence movement in Boston and helped to frame the idea that the American struggle was more about natural individual rights in the spirit of John Locke than it was national rights. Document 3. He argued that men naturally have the right to leave any society in which they feel their liberty is threatened and form a new society in which their freedoms are protected. This would eventually become the primary argument of the Declaration of Independence. However, not all colonists were persuaded to join the cause through rhetoric. In the loyalist-leaning southern colonies, many joined the Patriots due to threats to their lives and property from those hungry for American independence. Document 5. So here you'll see that I'm throwing in outside evidence, obviously, but there's also evidence from the document and which is basically the arguments of Sam Adams, who, when you read the document, you'll notice he makes a very clear distinction between governments that work for the people and ones that do not. And that if they do not, you can go off and form your own government. That's what his argument is there. That's my analysis of it. That's what he says. I throw in some outside evidence, which talking about John Locke and this idea of natural rights as opposed to national rights. My sentence, this would eventually become the primary argument of the Declaration of Independence, is so important because that's forward thinking. That's connecting it to the final end result of this whole struggle and the creation of a new country. The second document, when I talk about the Patriots and this poor woman who's writing about what's going on in North Carolina, one of the things that you might initially see when you're reading that document is, oh boy, this doesn't really support my claim, and you would be right. This is thrown in there to see how much you understand that history is not black and white. And so in this instance, because I know this is true and then this doesn't necessarily support my argument, I throw in the however. However, not all colonists were persuaded to join the cause through rhetoric. And then I explain what this document's all about. I don't quote the document. I don't go on and on about it. I simply say the main message behind it. That's what you need to do when you're using these documents to support your evidence. They know what they are, they've read them, and they understand them. What you'll notice about this paragraph is I have not done any of the capping. I've done it a little bit, but not a lot. And that's why I want to save that for another day. I just want to get to the how do you analyze and pull evidence to support your claim. Which brings us finally to our very last part of the DBQ body paragraph, and that is the modify, refute, or make reference to another moment in history. And the reason the College Board wants you to do this is to demonstrate again that you understand the broader picture and you understand that these are really big ideas and you can connect them. You're not just regurgitating information, that you can analyze it and really think about it in a very sophisticated academic way. So this is what I wrote. I said, this challenges the notion that the independence movement was entirely inspired by a desire for political change, as popular history would have us believe. Instead, a variety of reasons not as noble as desire for natural rights and liberty inspired Americans to join the cause with a varying degree of dedication. Now, this gives kind of it modifies argument a bit, but it kind of refutes it and says, yeah, there's a lot of people who really wanted America to be America for all these very noble, rah-rah-rah, patriotic kind of ideas, but others joined the cause reluctantly because they were pressured by their neighbors, just like in any time. Peer pressure and bandwagoning is a powerful social force. So just as I always tell you to stay clear of absolutes, everyone and everything and all that kind of thing, this is sort of a concession to that, saying that some Americans joined the cause because they felt that Americans were going to win and they wanted to be on the right side of history. So that's why it's so important. This last little statement can be 1 or 2 sentences, but it's so important that you include it because it's an entire point on your DBQ. So make sure you do it right. So that's it. Not so bad. Just those 5 steps. I hope this proves useful to you. I believe it should. We're gonna do this again next week when we start talking about how to cap the document, and I'll do paragraph 2 of this DBQ. If you want to look at the entire DBQ, I just posted it to Schoology, so you'll be able to see it with all the documents itself. This is a DBQ from 2 years ago, I believe, and it has a full 8 documents, but I've shortened it down to 5 to give us more of the idea of what your question is going to be. So that's, if you're interested, go look on Schoology and find it there under the sample DBQ from American Revolution, period 3. That's what we'll be looking at as a sample from here on out, as you work on your own DBQ in your assignments. So Thursday, you will have another assignment where you're gonna have to write your own based on our discussions. I really encourage you to start that process so that our Zoom hours on Friday, you can ask me questions about it. That would be really, really, really good use of our time. So until then, stay safe, stay healthy, stay smart, stay smiling, and I will see you soon.